Good evening, everyone. We continue on from chapter 10. And I draw your attention that in the last couple of chapters, they are all contiguous. It carries on one after another as God lays down his complaints, his rebuke, his charges against Israel. And so let me just redraw our focus. Our focus here is that the focus audience is actually Israel. And by Israel, we mean the northern kingdom. There is also, secondarily, the southern kingdom, right, of Judah. And this would be the southern. Also remember, Israel is also known by another name or called by another name, and that will be Ephraim. And so bear this in mind as we put all this together. Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. It says, When Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Something that we need to break down. Now, Israel, again, this is the northern. And it says, when Israel was a youth. Now, the word youth here, I think it can be referred to as a boy or young boy, in fact, right? The English is lad, so we'll just leave it at that. A boy or a young man, meaning when Israel was very young. Now, understand this in chapter 1, when the vision that was given to Hosea, that he would be marrying Gomer, and then there will be three children, Jezreel, then there will be Lo Ruhamah, and then Lo Ami. There were two boys and one girl. Now, in that whole picture, it was children of Hosea. And the names of the children are very pertinent to the messaging that God was doing. Now, in chapter 11, God is using Israel with regards to a young boy. Uh, Previously, it's always Israel going after other men, involved in harlotry. Israel, as a wife, treats God as one of them. And she goes away and takes shelter and be loved by other men. So that was the whole picture in the earlier chapters. But as we go towards the end, God now uses a different illustration with regards to Israel. He says, when Israel was a young boy, I, this would be Jehovah, I loved him. So him would be Israel. Now, remember the word love, right? Remember the word loved here. And it is ahav. It is to protect. It is to provide. This is the concept, the Hebrew concept of love. So whenever you read about God loved Israel, it is about God demonstrating his concern, his care for Israel, and in this case, the northern kingdom is still talking about northern kingdom, to protect, to provide. And then it says, and there was something else that happened. It says, out of Egypt, I would be God, called my son. This one is the same. Israel is my son, right here. And so we cannot run away from the context, right? My son is Israel as a youth, him. And the idea here of out of would be from. We know that at the early stage of the nation of Israel, the nation was in Egypt. So we need to understand what it means by God calling Israel from Egypt, or out of Egypt in that sense. If you are able to go back and read Exodus chapter 3 onwards, I would say, you find that we have Egypt and Israel is in Egypt. And so this would be the early days of the formation of the nation of Israel. And it's still with reference to this particular event that happened. Now, we also need to remember there was another place that's outside of Egypt called Sinai. And it was from Sinai that God called, right? God called, and Israel was taken out of Egypt. Now, you must understand this kind of a relationship. God called Israel to the wilderness to meet him at Sinai. This is the entire imagery in the minds of all Israelites, even the Jews today, that God called the nation from out of Egypt, and that would be the case, to a very specific place called Sinai. Now, in this case, you find that it is God who is doing the calling. I called, right? God called. And the way that God called Israel was through his prophets, and that would be through Moses. And the spokesperson for Moses would be Aaron. Now, that is the whole picture. And this is a recollection that God is now telling them, long, long time ago, when Israel was very, very young, like a young boy. I had loved him. I had protected him. I had taken him out of Egypt, provided for him. When there's no water, I gave him water. When there's no food, I gave him food. When they wanted meat, I gave them meat. And nothing on their clothes and sandals wore out. And that is how God loved Israel. Verse 2. The more they called them, the more they went from them. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and burning incense to the idols. Now, note that these two are an A and a B. They're telling us the same thing, but saying it differently. All right. So let us just break down the first one first. Now, understand this. There are two third person masculine plural pronouns that we have to bear in mind: they and them. The second one would be them and they. And so understand that this is how we would actually interpret the view. The first they would be the prophets. The second them would be Ephraim. Now understand how God calls his people. He sends his prophets. The first one would be Moses. When Israel was a youth, I loved him. At that point in time, God says, I called my son. And with that, God sent Moses. So always remember, God uses prophets. And now, in the book of Hosea, God is using Hosea. So through the ages, God uses his prophets to go to his people, to call on his people, to rebuke his people, to invoke the people to repentance. The picture that's given to us in verse 2 is that the more the prophets called Ephraim, the more Ephraim went away from them. Now, this is the word, the same word from. This word is away from. It is the same word as this word here, out of. Same word, right? Same word. And so be aware that sometimes when the English may not be using the same word, the Hebrew does use the same word. So this out of and this from is actually the same word. So away from Egypt, I called my son. The more they called them, the more they went away from them, away from the prophets, because they cannot stand what the prophets are rebuking them. And in some cases, they will kill the prophets. And so God is charging them this very interesting charge. They kept sacrificing to the Baals. Now, notice this is in the plural. The Baals are the lords. So understand this. The Baals are also called the lords. So Baals literally mean lords in the plural. And because they are called lords, and the word Baal in the Hebrew is, it has broad meanings, right? The woman calls the husband Baal because she is the master of the house. Uh, and when the Israelites go to worship other gods, they call them Baals or Baalim, right? Baals. Now, obviously, one of those are called Baal by name, but in general, the word Baals here really means lords, and they are idols. And where do we see the word? Here. That's why this is an A and a B. Sacrificing and burning incense are very much the same thing. And so, what is the emphasis? They kept focusing away from God. They kept focusing on the idols. Verse 3, yet it is I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. Let's unpack this a little bit. Yet it is I. I is Jehovah. I taught Ephraim to walk. It's as an imagery of a baby, right? Growing up to be a little boy, and he learns to walk. Now, this is the imagery. Now, obviously, Ephraim, the northern kingdom that is particularly focused here, at that point in time was a very young nation, barely could walk. And God called Israel out of Egypt to give him his laws, his Torah, to teach them how to walk before God as a people of God. Now, we can see many illustrations, obviously. Israel being a wife, there's a covenant. But in particular, in chapter 11, the focus is on the long time relationship God had with Israel and Ephraim. And that God taught Ephraim to walk through Moses. I took them in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. The word here for heal is to restore them, right? Restore them, uh, and to make them back into a nation. They weren't a nation. They had many people, and to heal them means to bring them back into a relationship with God, with Jehovah. And God, as a father, would teach Ephraim how to walk before him using all the Torah, the instructions and directions God told Moses, and Moses told the children of Israel. That is what is very important. In Numbers 11:12, look at this. Numbers 11:12. If you have the time, you can read this. It gives us a picture there, that that it is like a nursing father carrying the suckling child. And it is a time when Israel was a little boy learning how to, well, beyond crawl, I guess, starting to walk. And God is just caring for Israel. And God is doing that through Moses. And that is the importance of the prophets. Importance of the prophets. Verse 4. I led them with cords of a man, with bonds of love, and I became to them the one who lifts the yoke from their jaws. I bent down and fed them. So understand that this is a picture, this is an imagery of how God raised up Ephraim. So understand this as a imagery. When they were very young, God portrayed himself as a father caring for them, right? I became to them as one who lifts the yoke from their jaws, feeding them, bending down, caring for them like a child with cords of a man, right? In verse 4. What do you mean by cords of a man? The word cords of a man uh, essentially is to tie them together and join them together as, no, join together with bonds of love. This is the same, the bonds would be ropes, right? This is the ropes. So God and Israel were joined together with ropes of love. And again, love, I'll repeat it myself. Love is ahav. And what does love represent? Protection and provision. This is the idea. God gave them the security. God gave them what they need to live. God taught them how to grow. And God fed them like a father to a child. That's the picture that you have in verse 4. Verse 5. And they will not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria, he will be their king, because they refuse to return to me. Now, this one requires a bit of explanation, and this is prophetic, right? In verse 5, it is prophetic. They will not return. Return means shuv. They were from Egypt. God says they are not going to go back to Egypt. So this is a definite number one, right? Number one is will not go back to Egypt. But what is number two? Right here. Number two prophecy is this: Assyria will be their king. So we now know that where will they go? They will go to Assyria. All right. They will go to Assyria and not to Egypt. And the reason is because they refuse. Now, the word refuse comes from the Hebrew word ma'en, and Basically, um, how should you say it? They are rejecting. I guess you can say rejecting. Um, what else can you say? Um, Refuse is to uh, reject, because they are rejecting God, right? They are rejecting God. They are not wanting God to be their God, right? Verse 6, the sword will whirl against their cities and will demolish their gate bars and consume them because of their counsels. Now, yesterday we saw about their counsels, right? They depended on their counsels of their warriors, people who are mighty in battle. And so they built walled cities. And I told you yesterday that these are indications that Ephraim, the northern kingdom, has learned to depend on their mighty men to defend themselves and have built walls to trust in their own way. Now, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And as Solomon had given it to them, now in Jeroboam the second, they have ignored the advice of Proverbs chapter 3. They have relied on their own way, on their own people, on their own methods to do what they need to defend themselves. And so God says the the sword will, well, this word is will whirl. And how should we say this? Will I guess the word seems to say to dance around. So the picture here is the sword will be the one coming after them against their cities, going all around. Now, you also need to understand that in the old days, when they go and attack a city, they don't ram into the gates, right? They will lay siege around the city. And this is a picture of the impending, this is the imagery of Assyria coming to the northern nation. And so you would see that they will dance around the city, they will demolish. The word demolish here will cause the, let's say, cause the gates to fail. And so that they will not be able to defend themselves because they are trusting themselves. They are refusing to return to God. Uh, and this is so important. Remember, the word is shuv. They refuse to return to God in that relationship. And so God says, fine, you want to trust yourself, expect everything that you trust in to fail. And they and the sword will consume them. The word consume them means to eat them because of their counsel, because of plan, what they plan, and who they have confidence. This is the picture, it's an imagery of the future. Verse 7. Verse 7 says this. So my people are bent on turning from me. Now understand the word from, right? Uh, though they call them on high, but none exalts. So what does this mean? So take a look at this. My people, Ephraim, God is still calling them his people. They are bent on turning from me. Now, first of all, this word is bent. Bent is hang on. They hang on to this idea. They hang on to uh, this idea of turning from me. Now, this word is meshuva. It means this is meshuva. Let me just write this down. Meshuva. It comes from the root word shuv, which is to turn back. But it literally means this. This is the turning away. Right? Turning away. Away from God. And this is the idea, well, the modern idea of backsliding. Or apostasy. But this is a modern idea. But the Hebrew idea is turning from, meaning you're supposed to turn back to God. They are hanging on to this idea of turning away from God. Now, this is a very sad occasion because God calls them my people, expects them to at least acknowledge their faults and come back home. Now, though they call them on high, in verse 7, we read that they are not holding on to God. They know apparently God, right? They know God, but they do not exalt God, right? They do not exalt God. They don't lift up God on high to the point that God is the only one. They have many. So the idea here is that yes, they worship God, but they actually worship gods. And among all the gods, there is no one true God that they hang on to. And so God is saying this action is bent on going away from me. And so now God goes into a series of rhetoricals. Verse 8, how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? And in verse 8, this is Admah. Uh, Admah is the place which is around the Dead Sea. How can I treat you like Zeboim? That's also the place around the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, right? And if you recall, Zeboim was in, where was Zeboim? Zeboim is in Genesis 14, right? This is in Genesis 14. What happened in Genesis 14 is that the kings made war with Abraham, right? With Abraham, and in so doing, the well, not specifically Abraham, with the kings of the Dead Sea area of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in so doing, Lot was taken, and so Abraham went to rescue Lot. And that was part and parcel of the efforts. But Zeboim had a longer history. And let me show you how you can read this. Um, Zeboim is the adversaries. Treat you like Zeboim. The idea here is in Deuteronomy. I think you can read Deuteronomy as well. Deuteronomy chapter 29, and in verse 23, you read about Admah, about Zeboim, you read about Sodom, and you read about Gomorrah, right? Gomorrah. And what happened was that these were the ones that God overthrew in anger. And so this picture here is of God being angry and God was going to destroy them. Next two lines. My heart is turned over within me. My compassions are kindled. What God is trying to say is, as much as he is angry with them, he is holding back because he um he he wants to do Ephraim good. So he's asking himself, am I about to give you up? Right? This is literally give up to Assyria. Am I going to surrender? The word surrender is to deliver, also give up. Right? This is an A and a B. How can I make you like Atma? How can I treat you like Zeboim? Also an A and a B. The way God had destroyed them in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then God now explains, my heart is turned over in me. My compassions are kindled. The word kindle is to grow warm. Um, is that God does not want to judge Israel so violently. I think you can use that. Uh, it is that it is building. Right? You can see the imagery. It's building. God is very angry, but God doesn't want to come to the point where he has to unleash it all onto Ephraim and Israel, the northern kingdom. So God is now having this rhetoric. So can I just give you up like that? I've seen you from Egypt, and that's been such a long while with me. I brought you up, and there is this whole concept of the father-son relationship, that there is this filial understanding still within. But God is stroking this mainly because the sins of Israel and Ephraim is bad, and is getting from bad to worse. In verse 9, it says, I will not execute my first fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again. Now, is this the case that God says, I'm not going to destroy you? Now, let's take a look at the words first. Verse 9 says, I will not execute my first fierce anger. This fierce anger, it is a kindling, an anger that is on fire. So I will not execute or take action on this fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again. Now, this word destroy is to bring to ruin, right? Bring to ruin. Again. For I am God. Now, this is a very important phrase here. The word here is El Anoki, I am God. And then it says here, Lo Ish, I am not a man. And then it says here, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. What is happening here is God says, after he has destroyed and he has brought Assyria in, God is not going to do this again because he is willing to, how should we say, he is He wants to be favorable to Ephraim, right? Uh, and hold back that anger and not destroy them again, means one more time. Just like God destroying the world once, He's not going to destroy the world the same way again. So God has destroyed Ephraim in the sense that they will be dispersed, but Judah will stay back to plow. Assyria will come and Assyria will be their king. But eventually, when they come back, God says, I am God. I am not man. I'm not going to change. My whole plan is that the Holy One, God is the Holy One, is in your midst. This is an important concept. The midst would be in Jerusalem. And I will not come in wrath. Now we have to take a look at this. It doesn't say we will not come in wrath, right? I will not come in wrath. This word here has two meanings, right? Let me show you. This word here has two meanings. The word here is ear, and it has two meanings. One would be, well, I guess you could say anguish or terror. The second meaning is city. And what essentially it tells us is this, that God has always promised that He will always be in Jerusalem and nowhere else. And wherever they may go, God will not put His name there. God has only put His name at a place where He showed them, and that was Jerusalem. And this whole verse, it could be understood that I am God. I have said that I am going to appoint a place, that I will be there, that the Holy One is in your midst. I will live in Jerusalem. The temple will be there. I'm not a man that I will just change my mind, do this, do that. And I will not go to any other city. I will not come in wrath. That's not what it means, that you can see this. The second meaning, the city, I will not go into any other city. No matter where they are, God still wants to be in Jerusalem. Verse 10 and 11, our last two verses. They will walk after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. Indeed, he will roar. And his sons will come trembling from the west. They will come trembling like birds from Egypt, like doves from the land of Assyria. And I will settle them in their houses, declares the Lord. And that would be the end of the declaration over the last couple of chapters. And so let's unpack this before we end. They, Ephraim, it will come upon a time where God is going to call them back. God is not going to destroy them again. God says, I am God. I am the Holy One in your midst. God has appointed, right? Appointed a place. And that place is Jerusalem. And so it says here, they, is Ephraim, will walk after the Lord. After the Lord means behind, right? Behind the Lord. What picture does this give you? It gives you this, right? If this is a picture of the Lord, then you would find that Ephraim are all of them behind, right? Behind. And what does this mean is that this gives us a picture of the Lord is my shepherd, and the sheep walks after or behind God as a shepherd. That is what it means. They will walk behind the Lord. He will roar like a lion. Well, this one is an imagery, right? The imagery is a mighty roar. And in this word here is a roar of victory. Indeed, he will roar, and his sons will come trembling. The word trembling is terrified. From the west. Now, the word here, and sons, and the word his is inserted in, and this will be God's sons, right? They will come. Now, the word come isn't there. Basically, this one, come trembling, is part and parcel of the same word. It's not about come trembling, it's about his sons will be terrified. I think would be a good word. They will be terrified. And then it says, from out of, right? From the, it'll be out of the west or the sea. You'll be interested to find out that the way that the direction works in Hebrew is this. The man in Israel will always face east. And when you are in Israel, when you look east, there will be the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem, right? East, and it goes all the way to Jordan, right? And when you look west, it will be behind, and this will be the sea, the Great Sea, right? The Mediterranean Sea, and thereby this is also called west. And so they will come from that part, from away, from across the seas, and they will come trembling. Verse 11, the idea is they will come, they will be terrified. Like birds from Egypt, right? Egypt will be the south. Like doves from the land of Assyria. Like Jonah. Dove is Jonah. The book of Jonah, that's the Hebrew word for dove. From the land of Ashur, this will be north. And I, God, will make them. This one is, will cause them. Cause them to sit. The word is sit in their houses. Now, interestingly, in Malay, we use the word duduk. Right? The word duduk. The word duduk is to sit. And it gives us the picture of living. Right? They will live in their houses, back in the land. And so this whole picture here that we are getting, right? It is the return to the land. And God will be compassion. There will not be any more anger. And God brings Ephraim back. So understand, yesterday when we left off, God was saying, well, I'm going to ride Ephraim away. And we see this as a picture of going away to Assyria and then all over the place after that. And Judah will continue plowing. And we can see even till today, Judah is still in the land. They left for Babylon and it came back. But one day, just one day, and we haven't seen that day yet, God is going to bring Ephraim back. And I suppose when we look at this, we call it the end times. And this is one of the indications. If and when you see the northern kingdom surfacing and coming back, and in this case, trembling or being very terrified of God, and coming back to the land, then I suppose you can say that this entirety of Hosea chapter 11 will come to a head. God says, I am God. I'm not a man. What I say will happen. That is basically what God is saying. I'm not a man. I sometimes I say things that I can't do. But God says, I am God. Look at this. I am God. I am not man. I am the Holy One in your midst. And God is saying, this is what I am going to do. And God will cause them to come back. Now, notice this word. Cause them means God is going to be the one doing it. And how are they going to come back? I really don't know. But I can safely say that when we see this, we can see God's hand at work. And it will be an immense event. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.